What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review the opening night movie for the New York Film Festival, The Tragedy of Macbeth, from director Joel Coen, which I saw with the director and the key cast in attendance answering questions during this really fun press conference after the show. And let me specify, no, this is not a Coen Brothers movie, in that Ethan Coen, his brother, sat this one out. And not to worry, the brothers didn't get in some fist fight and part ways forever. According to their longtime composer Carter Burwell, Ethan's just burned out on making movies for the time being and wants to focus on writing some plays for the theater. And for those who don't know, typically but not always, Joel Coen has always received sole directing credit on their movies, while Ethan always receives sole producer credit, and depending upon the movie, they would juggle and or share the writing duties. My understanding is that their roles on the set have always been a little blurry, but due to Directors Guild rules, this is the compromise that they arrived at decades ago. But if you're going to lose a collaborator as talented as Ethan Coen, I guess you could do worse than swapping him out for William Shakespeare as your main collaborator. Shakespeare wrote The Tragedy of Macbeth, typically abbreviated to just Macbeth, but he wrote the play way back in 1606, and people have been performing it on the stage for over 400 years at this point, and now people have been making it into movies for well over 100 years, ever since James Stewart Blackton did the first movie adaptation back in 1908. And I expect that people will continue to adapt this play for at least a few more centuries, and I have no problem with that at all. It's my personal favorite by the Bard. I've read it several times, I've seen it on stage, and I always make a point to hunt down each and every movie version that I can. Orson Welles, Akira Kurosawa, and Roman Polanski, they've all given us fantastic adaptations in the past, and looking ahead, people are going to start including Joel Coen's name right alongside theirs as one of the best filmmakers ever to take a crack at this dark and macabre play. And for those of you itching to see it, the film's going to be getting a limited theatrical release starting Christmas Day, followed by its release on Apple TV Plus on January 14th, 2022. And if you're worried about spoilers in this review, sorry, but it's a non-issue. I can't give anything away. This is a faithful adaptation of the play, but with a wildly original visual style and fresh interpretation of the material, which I'm eager to discuss. It's not surprising to me that so many legendary directors have tackled this material at this point, because the story gives the director so many ideas to play with, including witches, black magic, war, betrayal, murder, insanity, eerie prophecies, more murder and betrayal, and finally, this epic bloody climax that is enormously satisfying on so many levels. But it was actually the idea of Joel Coen's wife, Frances McDormand, Lady Macbeth herself, that they tackled this play. Frances wanted Joel to direct it on the stage, but as Joel Coen told us after the show, his mind doesn't really work that way. He said that for him, cinema is all about telling the audience what to look at, for how long, and from what angle, whereas directing for the stage is totally different. And with decades of great filmmaking under his belt at this point, he felt far better equipped making a movie, and luckily, they got their first choice to play the lead in the Scottish play, Denzel Washington. And for those who don't know, Denzel has a long history of performing Shakespeare. He got a start on the stage playing Othello at age 20, not far from where today's screening was held. And then in 1993, he appeared in Kenneth Branagh's movie adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And as far as I'm concerned, he just nailed it as Macbeth, especially as Macbeth becomes increasingly power-mad, ruthless, and bloodthirsty in the latter part of the story. Usually the parts of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are played by younger actors, the implication being that late in life, people tend to be less mad with ambition, but according to Frances at the press conference, she and Denzel were determined to prove that they are just as hungry as they've ever been, both on the screen and off. They fleshed out the rest of the cast with a variety of actors from both sides of the pond, including Brendan Gleeson, Henry Melling, Corey Hawkins, Katherine Hunter, who's absolutely brilliant as the witches, but we also have Ralph Ineson and Alex Haskell as Ross, the one character that felt really fleshed out in new and surprising ways, offering a really fresh interpretation on what's going on if you choose to read between the lines of the play when it comes to the attack on Banquo and his son, as well as the eventual suicide of Lady Macbeth. As far as accents go, everyone just uses their own accent, and according to Frances, at one point, Joel told everyone to use an American accent and then immediately reversed that decision the following day. But in addition to this mix in backgrounds, the cast is also pulled from both film as well as theater, giving the audience a wide array of different kinds of performances to enjoy. The one thing that's abundantly clear from the word go is that visually, this is arguably the boldest visual experiment with the play to date, at least in terms of movies. Check out the trailer, which recently dropped, if you want a taste of the experience. But from the beginning, Joel Coen knew that he wanted to shoot in the classic 4:3 Academy ratio, as well as in black and white. Coen stated that using black and white instantly abstracts the image, and he tried approaching the movie as if it were some old Carl Theodor Dreyer movie, like The Passion of Joan of Arc, where he would strip away any detail that wasn't absolutely essential. But he also took inspiration from 1920s German Expressionism, where the sets of the film almost seem to become a visual extension of the inner emotions of the characters. Even big outdoor spaces were shot on a soundstage, giving Joel total control over the image, and he used that control to full advantage with what will come to be regarded as one of the most visually distinctive movies of his career. And the movie just has so many wild shots, almost like the camera is like a god looking down on the characters, fully exploiting the absolutely jaw-dropping and awe-inspiring production design. The sets become almost like this nightmarish labyrinth at times in ways that were just chocolate for the eyes. And I loved how the movie completely avoided any traditional sense of realism. They're not going for the Dark Ages at all. Instead, they're going for this environment that can only exist in one's imagination. And this kind of self-conscious style, look, and design, it might be the greatest success of the production overall, given this perfect landscape where this bloody tale can unfold, serving up a series of shots that are some of the most interesting of Joel Coen's career. I should also give a shout out to director of photography Bruno Delbonnel, who's worked with the Coens before in movies like Inside Llewyn Davis and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which I also happened to see at the New York Film Festival back in 2018. The real trick with any movie adaptation of Shakespeare is to avoid the feeling of staginess. Joel Coen apparently watched a lot of Shakespeare movies in order to avoid the mistakes of the past, like having lengthy soliloquies taking place as voiceover narration. For him, the real challenge was preserving the language of the play while making it feel as cinematic and visual as possible, and I think on the whole he succeeded, especially toward the end with the way the film portrays the advancing of Birnam Wood to Dunsinane. And then the final battle between Macbeth and Macduff on the castle walls is particularly satisfying to watch. Let's not forget that Denzel is the equalizer, and even as he approaches age 70, he can still throw down some killer fight scenes. And Corey Hawkins was also totally game as Macduff and gave Denzel a very worthy foe to lock horns with. But the most interesting adversary by far is that of the witch played by Catherine Hunter, who's basically the contortionist from hell with his absolutely terrifying voice. And Coen went absolutely nuts depicting her in all sorts of interesting ways, from her eerie reflections in pools of water or perching in the rafters like a raven about to pluck out people's eyes. Her scenes were by far my favorite of the film. And while a lot of people like to read this play as if all the supernatural ingredients are inside Macbeth's head and have totally logical explanations, and that's a completely plausible reading of the story, for my part, I love it when a movie leans all the way in on the supernatural horror, the black magic, the evil omens that are inherent in the story. And this movie can be truly horrific at times, in particular during the attack on Macduff's home, a scene which viewers will not quickly forget. And there are a few more comments by Joel Coen that I want to share, the first of which was his decision to introduce cross-cutting between scenes in the play, scenes that typically play out in their entirety, and he defended this decision by calling attention to how Shakespeare was already doing his own fair share of parallel editing between events happening at the same time, which from Joel's point of view makes Shakespeare that much more impressive as a storyteller, anticipating innovations and techniques that would come centuries later. And his final comment worth repeating was his attitude toward this movie going to Apple TV+. When discussing different platforms, the only comment that ever makes him react in horror is when somebody tells him that they saw one of his movies on a plane, but otherwise he doesn't look down on ancillary markets or platforms like Netflix or Apple TV+. While obviously every director wants their movie to be seen on the most impressive canvas possible, he's also all too aware that older formats like VHS are why he and his brother were able to have careers in the first place. The home video market and cable are how so many fans discovered their work. And speaking from my own experience, I saw Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, The Hudsucker Proxy, and Fargo all at home long before I ever had my first theatrical experience with the Coen brothers, which was The Big Lebowski. So yeah, he's absolutely right. But I guess the final question is, what is the official verdict of the movie? I've been saying a lot of stuff, but I haven't actually been really reviewing the movie. And I guess the question is, are people going to enjoy this or simply be bewildered when it doesn't feel like something made by the guy who directed The Big Lebowski? I think in the end, the audience for this movie is going to be niche, but for those who enjoy it, they will feel like it was made just for them. The Man Who Wasn't There isn't necessarily the most beloved movie by the Coen brothers, but for those who love it, they do so intensely, and I think we can expect a similar niche audience for The Tragedy of Macbeth. On the other hand, I think it's going to quickly become the most watched movie adaptation of Shakespeare in the 21st century, so a lot of high school kids and college kids are going to be exposed to it in the years to come. It may end up becoming a new generation's perfect introduction to the Bard. For my part, I was into the movie, perhaps more on an intellectual level than an emotional one, but it's not likely to upset my current top 10 list of favorite Coen brothers movies anytime soon. And speaking of which, my current top 10 list as it stands, and it pains me to even do this because I have to leave a lot of good movies off, but at number 10, I would have Ballad of Buster Scruggs, or at least the short film that opens it, which I just thought was absolutely fantastic. At number 9, True Grit, then O Brother Where Art Thou, Blood Simple, Barton Fink, Miller's Crossing at number 5, No Country for Old Men, Raising Arizona, The Big Lebowski, and for number 1, I would go with Fargo. But I definitely recommend The Tragedy of Macbeth for fans of their work, and especially to fans of Shakespeare, so there it is. Check it out for yourself in January. If you stuck with me this long, I hope you enjoyed my little rant. If so, like the video, subscribe to the channel, but hope everyone has an amazing weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.